The story is set across 11 different cities in Russia, following a colorful cast of characters. On New Year's Eve, their paths cross in unexpected ways, leading to life changing encounters. Some of them get through their problems with the help of strangers, others rely on sheer miracles. And all of it revolves around the idea of 6 degrees of separation. Is the theory that any two people in the world are connected by no more than 6 social links. In other words, you're just 6 handshakes away from knowing anyone on Earth. The movie introduces us to a range of fascinating characters: a taxi driver and a pop diva, a businessman and an actor, a snowboarder and a skier, the student and a Swiss girl, a fireman and a general manager, a thief and a policeman, and even a migrant worker and a presidential assistant. One story takes us to an orphanage in Kaliningrad, where the children are joyfully preparing for New Year's Eve. They're playing a fun city name chain game. If you don't know it, here's how it works. Someone names a city, and the next person has to name another city that starts with the last letter of the previous one. The room is full of laughter, and even Yusuf, a soft hearted migrant worker from Turkmenistan, joins in. At the orphanage, one girl has been spinning a fantastic tale. She proudly tells everyone that her father is constantly traveling to different cities. But her secret unravels when a mean spirited girl discovers a newspaper listing the cities visited by President Medvedev. Shockingly, those cities line up perfectly with the places the orphan girl claimed her father was traveling to. Under mounting pressure and ridicule, the girl blurts out an unbelievable claim. Her father is none other than President Medvedev. Naturally, no one believes her. Instead, they mock and taunt her relentlessly. Pushed into a corner, she makes a desperate promise. During the president's televised New Year's address, he'll use the secret phrase, "Trust in miracles, but rely on yourself," to prove her story is true. How you celebrate New Year's is how you'll spend the whole year. He is stuck in Yakutsk, unable to spend New Year's with his girlfriend, whom he hasn't seen in 6 months. Only now does he realize how much the distance has grown between them. During a call, she coldly tells him not to worry. She already has someone to celebrate with, and before he has a chance to ask, the call gets disconnected. Combined with his colleague's earlier snide remarks, he decides he can't let this slide. He ditches the airport and rushes home, determined to make things right. Meanwhile, if the saying holds true, the absolute last place anyone would want to celebrate New Year's is in jail. Yet that's exactly where we meet a thief and a policeman. The officer drags the thief into his cell, ignoring the man's protest of innocence. The thief insists he didn't steal the pendant from the jewelry store where he was detained, but the officer openly mocks him, his disdain evident. Elsewhere in the city, we meet a taxi driver who's the subject of ridicule for being in a parasocial relationship with pop diva Vera Brezhneva, played by none other than Vera Brezhneva herself. But fate has a sense of humor. Just moments later, the singer's manager hails his cab in a rush, needing a ride to a nightclub for her performance. At a busy convenience store, the general manager of a company is shopping for champagne. She's buying it for her fiancé, who couldn't celebrate with her because of work. But then, in a twist straight out of a soap opera, she spots her fiancé in the very same store, shopping with another woman. Back at the orphanage, the young girl, feeling hopeless and humiliated, decides to run away. Her close friend, a fellow orphan boy, tries to stop her. He shares an inspiring idea, the theory of 6 handshakes. He explains how anyone in the world can connect to someone else through a chain of 6 people or fewer. He's determined to prove it works. The boy begins the chain by calling the student, a graduate of the orphanage who now lives in Cuba. Or so he claims. In truth, Cuba is the name of his student dormitory in Kazan. But the student has a little secret of his own. He's been pretending to live in the actual Cuba to impress a girl he met online who lives in Switzerland. He's even gone so far as to decorate his room with tropical props and fake a beachy vibe every time the Swiss girl video calls him. When the orphan boy calls, Misha happens to be mid-video call with Swiss girl. Trapped and unable to refuse in front of her, Misha promises to help and swears the president will get the message. On a plane, the businessman finally boards his flight but can't shake his anxiety. He is consumed with guilt over his fight with his girlfriend and debates whether or not to call and apologize. His seatmate, an actor, quickly picks up on his turmoil. But instead of comforting him, the actor feeds his insecurities, pouring fuel on the fire by voicing all the businessman's worst fears. The general manager visits her best friend's home where the truth about her cheating fiancé is already well known. Her friends, eager to console her, begin teaching her about astronomy. One of them even suggests that she make a wish to meet a nice man at midnight on New Year's Day. Here's how the ritual goes, she says. Grab a small piece of paper. Write down your deepest wishes, with as much detail as you can, in 1 minute. Burn the paper until it turns to ashes. Drop the ashes into your champagne, give it a swirl, and drink it down. Their playful conversation quickly turns into an argument, with each friend trying to offer their own advice. The tension only breaks when the general manager begins to tear up, prompting them to stop and comfort her. Meanwhile, the student reaches out to his friend, the snowboarder. This friend once went snowboarding on the same track as the president, but he explains that he lost the president's phone number when his SIM card was damaged. Instead, the snowboarder offers to call the pop diva. The student agrees, but before he can make the call, he and his skier friend start bickering over who's better. The argument turns into an impromptu race down the building's stairwell, but chaos ensues when they accidentally knock over a retired neighbor. In a panic, they call an ambulance for her. Back in jail, the thief manages to pick the lock on his cell and sneak out. As he hides from the police, he ends up in the dressing room where he finds the policeman who detained him taking a shower. Still bitter, the thief impulsively steals the officer's uniform, puts it on, and sneaks out of the station dressed as a cop. The taxi ride with the pop diva and her manager takes an unexpected turn. The diva is furious because she and the manager had only agreed on one concert, not a nightclub gig. The taxi driver is getting increasingly irritated by the manager's condescending attitude. When the diva asks him to take her to the airport, the manager says to ignore her request. But the driver snaps and stops the car. He blames the engine, asks the manager to get out and push. And when the manager pushes, he hurriedly sits back in the car and drives away. At first, the diva is furious, but she softens when she realizes he was just looking out for her. She gives in and tells him to drive back. Instead of listening to her, the driver starts singing her latest hit. She joins in and they both have a laugh. Meanwhile, the actor, having a few drinks, shares with the businessman that he's on his way to the city to propose to his girlfriend. He explains that he fell in love with her at first sight and wants to propose after just 3 days of spending time together. He reveals that his girlfriend is an English teacher, which immediately catches the businessman's attention since his own girlfriend is also an English teacher. But soon, more and more similarities begin to pile up. As the realization dawns on him, the businessman can't ignore it any longer. The actor is talking about his girlfriend. The businessman feels trapped, suffocated by the coincidence. Desperately, he asks the actor if she's dating anyone, to which the actor responds that she is. but only someone who's always busy, neglecting her and her wishes, who's been with her for years and never proposed. The businessman starts to stew with jealousy and frustration, especially when the actor reveals that the man in question is often away on business trips. The businessman, seething, imagines how he might throw the actor off the plane. He finally asks, "Aren't you afraid of him?" To which the actor nonchalantly replies, "No, he's just off on another business trip." The snowboarder, eager to help the orphan girl, calls the pop diva. He asks her to relay the message to the president, and though she initially finds the request ridiculous, she softens when she hears that it's for the orphan girl. Her heart melts at the thought of helping the girl, and she tells the taxi driver to turn around and head back to the manager. She believes he can help because he knows the right people and has the connections. The taxi driver, however, isn't thrilled. He grumbles, saying that he too has connections. The taxi driver calls his uncle, who is a policeman, but the phone is in the uniform that was stolen by the thief. Dressed as a cop, the thief now moves around without raising suspicion. He enters an electronics store with the intention of stealing something. Inside, he unexpectedly runs into his ex-girlfriend, whom he had ghosted 5 years ago. After an awkward moment, he answers the call from the taxi driver, who is asking him to contact the president. Under expectant gaze of his ex, Thief promises to do so personally. Meanwhile, the pop diva, determined to help the orphan girl, decides to hijack the car and drive back to the manager to ask for his assistance. Back in the store, the thief tries to reconnect with his ex, but she ignores him. In a last-ditch effort, he lies, telling her there's about to be a robbery and convince her to take him to the back room. Just as he's coaxing her, two robbers in New Year's costumes burst in and start robbing the store. In the heat of the moment, the thief stops them. However, at the exact moment, the police officer, wearing the thief's left behind clothes, arrives and mistakenly thinks the thief is part of the robbery. The officer attacks him, allowing the real robbers to escape. The people in the store, witnessing the confusion, demanded the officer let the thief go, even holding him at gunpoint. The officer, stunned by this unexpected treatment, realizes that the thief was actually trying to stop the robbery. Wanting to save the thief's face, he decides to play along and pretends that the thief was not a criminal. Outside, the officer takes back his gun and tells the thief to follow him to the station to change clothes, implying he won't be arrested. In the heat of the moment, the thief hugs the officer in gratitude. Meanwhile, the businessman is desperate not to lose his girlfriend. When they transfer in Novosibirsk, he tricks the actor into smoking and locks him in a room. Taking off previously friendly facade, businessman confesses that he is the negligent boyfriend they've talked about. The actor's expression changes, but then he gets hold of himself and tells that it doesn't matter. That he's late for this flight, he can go on the next one and he will be with the businessman's girlfriend. That she doesn't love the businessman, and he can fool himself all he wants. Just as the businessman is about to leave, he gets a call from his brother, the thief. The thief asks him to help the orphan girl. The businessman opens up about being dumped, realizing that it's really over. The thief, now in high spirits after saving the store, not getting arrested and reconciling with his ex, encourages his brother not to give up and to fight until the end. "It's all worth it," he says. Inspired by his brother's words, the businessman decides to play fair and lets the actor go. In Ufa, the time zone difference means it's already New Year's. The general manager, still reeling from everything, writes down her wish on a piece of paper: to meet a man who will sweep her off her feet. Just as she finishes, she receives a phone call. Expecting it to be her fiancé, she answers. But it's the businessman asking her to contact the president and help the orphan girl. Unfortunately, by the time the call ends, it's already past midnight, and she misses her chance to make a wish. Overhearing about the time zone difference, the general manager decides to travel back in time, or at least to another time zone. Determined, she pulls herself together and sets off toward Bavli, which is 197 kilometers or 122 miles away from Ufa, in the hopes of making her wish again. Feeling desperate, she stands in the middle of the road and stops a passing fire truck. The fireman, understandably frustrated, calls her crazy, but she insists on driving anyway. As they drive, she explains that she must make her wish, citing astrological reasons like Venus being in the eighth house. The fireman, skeptical, thinks she's not in her right mind. Offended, she demands he stop the truck, threatening to walk the rest of the way. To her surprise, he actually stops. They sit in silence for a moment, and when it becomes clear she isn't planning to get out, he grumbles under his breath and starts the car. Yusuf, a kind migrant worker who works as a guard at the orphanage and sends all his earnings home, allows himself one treat a year, going to McDonald's. He steps away from his table. When he returns, he finds another man sitting at his table, eating his food. Yusuf, undeterred, sits down and starts eating the food in front of him. The man watches, looking uncomfortable, but Yusuf manages to drive him away. Only then does he realize the he, Yusuf, was sitting at the wrong table and the tray wasn't his to begin with. Feeling guilty, Yusuf notices a phone on the table. He picks it up and hears the general manager on the other end. Turns out the phone belongs to the assistant of the president. Realizing the situation, Yusuf rushes out to find the assistant, but it's too late. The snowboarder and the skier visit a granny in the hospital. Meanwhile, the student's roommates help him stage a Cuba, but things go terribly wrong and the situation becomes a complete disaster. The general manager barges into a random house, much to the astonishment of the homeowners, and helps herself to champagne. She writes her wish on the paper she took from the fireman, burns the paper, and drinks the champagne. She apologized to the hosts, who kindly offer her to stay and celebrate together, but feeling embarrassed, she leaves. As she checks the burned paper, she realizes her wish is still there. It turns out she burned the wrong part. She gives up, feeling defeated. The orphan boy overhears Yusuf on the phone discussing how he needs to help a little girl. The circle closes. It turns out that Yusuf has connections in the Kremlin or even the White House. He has a friend named Adil, a street cleaner who works in Moscow's Red Square. The orphan boy realizes that all the effort to form 6 handshakes hasn't led anywhere, and the orphan girl becomes upset. The student feels ashamed while the pop diva finds her photo in the taxi driver's car. Feeling down after the entire ordeal, the general manager makes her way back to the fireman's truck, asks what was on the part of the paper she burned and drank. At first, he's reluctant to answer, but then admits it was his work partner's X-ray referral. They share a laugh, but when she exits the truck, she trips and falls. At the orphanage, the other kids try to humiliate the orphan girl by forcing her to sit in front of the TV while they all watch the New Year's greeting from the president. Just as the broadcast begins, the electricity goes out. It's the orphan boy who turns off the TV to prevent the girl from being humiliated further, but the bully pushes him aside and turns it back on. The orphan girl stops the boy before he can hurt himself. She apologizes, realizing who her true friend is, and she no longer fears the others. To everyone's shock, at the end of the president's speech, he says, "Trust in miracles, but rely on yourself," proving that New Year's miracles can indeed happen. Midnight strikes, and everyone pops champagne, cheering and congratulating each other with shouts of Happy New Year. Yusuf enters dressed as Santa, while the orphan girl and orphan boy hug each other warmly, laughter and cheers filling the background. The passenger, who had laughed at the taxi driver's unrealistic love for the pop diva, recognizes the driver but is shocked to find the pop diva herself sitting in the back of the car. Meanwhile, the snowboarder and the skier celebrate New Year's with the granny. The student goes to an ice skating rink where he bumps into the Swiss girl. However, to his surprise, she's not in Switzerland at all. She works at the ice skate rental. They both laugh at the unexpected twist. The general manager is carried into her best friend's house with a bandaged leg. Her best friends recall the wish she made to meet a man who would sweep her off her feet. And there he is, carrying her into the house. At the airport, the businessman walks up to his girlfriend with the actor and asks her to choose between them. She looks at them both carefully and then asks, "Who's that?" It turns out to be just a coincidence, and the second Olya arrives to greet him. The orphan boy wonders how the president received his message. The scene shows that the street cleaner, Adol, wrote the message on the snow right under the Kremlin. Miracles come when you least expect them. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this story, because there are many more waiting to be told. See you in the next one. Bye!